All good? Good morning, and welcome to the Project 2049 Institute's Strategic Competition webinar series. My name is Michael Mazza, and I'm a Senior Director here at the Institute. Before beginning today, I'd just like to take a moment to offer thoughts, prayers, and well wishes from the Project 2049 Institute to the people of Taiwan. Their resilience has once again been on display in recent days. We anticipate that they will respond to this disaster as they have to prior ones, with steady hearts and determination. We all have much to learn from their example. Now, next Wednesday, President Biden will host Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at the White House for meetings and a state dinner. The next day, Prime Minister Kishida will address a joint session of Congress. These are appropriate honors for the leader of one of America's most important allies, both in the Indo-Pacific and globally. As the White House press secretary put it in announcing the visit will underscore the enduring strength of our alliance partnership, the unwavering U.S. commitment to Japan, and Japan's increasing global leadership role. Given the security challenges around the world in which both countries have significant interests in Europe and the Middle East, and especially in Asia, and given shared economic challenges and opportunities, the summit agenda promises to be a full one. Notably, the Biden-Kishida meeting will be followed by an historic trilateral summit, including Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., so there is lots to discuss. And to that end, today we are truly honored to have Project 2049 Chairman and former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs, Randy Shriver, engage the Honorable Richard Armitage in a discussion about the U.S. Japan Alliance and the forthcoming visit. Following that conversation, Jen Hong, a fellow Senior Director at 2049, will moderate a discussion between Yuko Mukai, Washington correspondent for the Yomiuri Shimbun and non-resident fellow at Project 2049, and Yuka Koshino, Associate Fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in Tokyo. We'll then wrap up with some Q&A. So, we've got some of the policy community's foremost experts on U.S.-Japan relations in the room, or the virtual room, this morning, and needless to say, I'm excited to get things started. But before that, I've got a couple of administrative announcements to make sure you have the best opportunity to participate. And here they are. So there are two ways to participate in today's live Q&A session. First, you may send questions directly to us at ask@project2049.net. That's ask@project2049.net. If you RSVP'd for the event, we sent an event reminder from that email just minutes ago. You can respond directly to that email with your questions if you wish. Secondly, if you are logged into a YouTube account and are watching this stream on Project 2049's YouTube channel, you may submit questions in the YouTube chat box, and our team will collect them and send them to the moderator. Note, and this is important, please include your name and affiliation when submitting questions. Questions with names and affiliations will be prioritized. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce the chairman of the Project 2049 Institute, the Honorable Randy Shriver, to launch our discussion today. Randy?
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. I am really honored and excited to have our special guest for this discussion today, somebody who's been a mentor and valued leader for myself, but so many others as well. You know our guest speaker. That's why you've tuned in. You don't need a lengthy introduction, but I think his record of service deserves an introduction. So I will do that. He's a 1967 graduate of the Naval Academy, and then served multiple tours in Vietnam, including being in country during the final days of the fall of Saigon in April 1975. He has a long and distinguished career of service in Washington. He served on Capitol Hill as administrative assistant to then Senator Bob Dole. He served in the Reagan administration in the Department of Defense as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia, then Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. He has a successful career in business, starting his own company twice. Currently serves as the president of Armitage International. And his most recent government service was as Deputy Secretary of State from 2001 to 2005. Where he played a key role in a number of issues, including the bilateral alliance with Japan, but also notably diffusing a possible war between India and Pakistan at the time. He's received numerous awards, including knighthood KBE from the Queen of England, Her Majesty. He also received, for the purposes of this audience, the Grand Cordon of the Order of the Rising Sun from the government of Japan. An incredibly accomplished leader and somebody who's invested a great deal in the U.S. Japan Alliance. So let's launch in. And Mr. Armitage, I'd like to start by echoing Mike's statement of condolences and prayers and thoughts for the people of Taiwan. It did remind me you were in Taiwan in the last major earthquake in 1999. Is there anything you'd like to share about that experience, but also you're witnessing the resolve of the people of Taiwan at that time?
Well, at that time in 99, over 2,000 people in Taiwan, unfortunately, were killed. But then, as now, Japan was one of the first countries to step up and to offer not only condolences, but actual aid and assistance. And it's not lost, I think, on the people of Taiwan, the leading role that Japan has had historically and unfortunately even down to this terrible earthquake.
Yeah, thank you for noting that. You later today will be part of a team that will roll out the new Armitage and I report. That's the 6th report that you've introduced. The contents are embargoed, so we won't get into specifics. But the fact that this is your 6th report speaks to your long-term interest in Japan, your investment in the policy matters related to the alliance, and we all look forward to that report later today. But again, it does speak to your long-term involvement in the U.S. Japan Alliance. Can you think back to before your first Armitage and I report and describe kind of the progress and the trajectory you've witnessed unfold and been a part of, really pushing particular initiatives? How far have we come, and what do you attribute that success to?
Well, first of all, the success has been because it hasn't, these reports successively have not solely focused on Japan. During each report, there was something that the United States needs to do that we tried to point out. Very happy that almost all of the recommendations from 2000 to the 5th report have been accomplished on both sides of the Pacific. And now the 6th report is in with the background or the backdrop of a Japan, in fact, a global community who has real questions about the isolationism that lurks in the background of the United States. And in fact, we note that one of the reasons that so many countries, Canada, Australia, Singapore now, Philippines, Great Britain, Germany, France, have flocked, at least in the naval area, to Japan, because I think Japan is seen as a nation who, if we do become more isolationist, that Japan will be able to pick up some of that slack and to realize completely the vision of Mr. Abe, Mr. Suga, and Mr. Kishida of a free, open, secure, and prosperous Indochina.
Thank you very much. Mr. Armitage, we are all anticipating the visit of Prime Minister Kishida next week. What do you think will be the headlines coming out of that? What do you think the major deliverables and accomplishments will be, and how would you weight them in terms of importance?
Well, I think, first of all, it'll be the defense and security area. I think that'll be a majority of the time, will occupy a majority of the time. I think a lot of other issues will be there. Chief among them, I believe, will be a discussion and perhaps a final decision on a new command and control situation for the United States. Many of us have had real questions, including yourself, about the appropriateness of having a Communist force of Japan who actually wears 2 hats, one with our alliance and the other for the 5th Air Force. That's confusing and needs to be resolved. Beyond that, technology, defense cooperation, we'll probably see some mention in the communique. cyber, space will have some mention. I personally hope there'll be more clarification on the counter-strike capabilities. There are several possible systems which Japan could buy. I think the United States Tomahawk system is probably the leader. And finally, I think there'll be some discussion of people to people. The real headline, I think, will be a reaffirmation and a reinvigoration of our security and defense relationship. The distance that Japan has come from the year 2000 to now is a light years of difference. And now the only question, I think, is a matter of how much urgency can Japan inject in the decisions and the direction that Japan is already heading.
Thank you. One of the developments, you mentioned how far Japan has come. One of the developments of the last couple of years is an announcement to approximately double their defense spending. And this is something that many of us have welcomed, and you have welcomed it. But I've also heard you talk about some of the risk and some of the downsides when you get such a bump in such a short period of time. How do you see the next few years playing out in terms of the increased resources available for Japan's defense spending?
Well, I suspect that Japan will think a little bit before they actually commit to one system or another, because doubling the defense budget is great, but it's only great depending on what systems you purchase, and particularly what systems which might fill a void which exists in our alliance, in the U.S. capabilities and the Japanese capabilities. If, after all, Japan were to spend this great bump in money on uniforms and barracks, that would not be, in my view, a wise expenditure. And I certainly hope that they learn from the experience in the Reagan administration, of which I was part. We got a lot of money, the president did, and we did not spend it wisely and well. We bought this system, that system, et cetera, never really made a major difference by purchasing a system which was absolutely on point to the problem we had with the then Soviet Union.
Yeah, thank you. This is something that we'll all watch carefully. And you mentioned the introduction of counter-strike. Without getting into systems, as you noted, Japan will have to think carefully about where their investments will go. How do you see this fundamentally changing the capabilities of the alliance, combined with the redefinition of Article 9 and how Japan looks at collective defense and the like? Do you see this contributing to a more capable alliance in terms of specific scenarios that we care a great deal about?
I certainly do. First of all, on Article 9, the reinterpretation, I think, has now given the alliance the flexibility to do what we need to do, go where we need to go. And the announcement of the desire to have a counter-strike capability is part of that new reinterpretation of Article 9. But it's absolutely essential, in my view, because the threat that Japan has from North Korea, further indicated by the recent decision of the North Koreans not to discuss the abductee issue with Mr. Kishida, indeed, not to have a summit. So I think we still have to have a capability to be able to respond. There is one, in my view, thing that does need to be resolved, and that is with the counter-strike capability, as I understand it, Japan still says they will not use this in a preemptive way. It seems to me we shouldn't announce that at all beforehand. And second of all, if you know beyond the shadow of a doubt that you are about to endure a strike from a foe, then it would make great sense to preempt. So there are a lot of things I think that still have to be resolved, but there's no question that Japan is on the right track.
Thank you. You mentioned Japan's greater respect in the region and role in the region, and maybe even filling a potential void if the United States, through a change of presidents, were to abdicate some of its leadership responsibilities and some of the commitments to the alliances were called into question. We've seen Japan step up on aid to Ukraine. Japan is also increasingly using tools such as security assistance, relaxing its ban on export of military equipment. All of these things contribute to Japan having a more prominent role as a regional player. You've had a lot of experience in promoting that and knitting that together. I recall your work in U.S., Japan, Australia, Trilateral, certainly push for U.S., Korea, Japan, which now came to fruition with the spirit of Camp David. Could you talk a little more about the Japanese role in the region and some of these mini-laterals and how you see this kind of development?
Yeah, the role in the region, Randy, has changed significantly, particularly after Mr. Kishida visited NATO, visited the EU, visited Ukraine, provided assistance to Ukraine, standing by, as I understand it, whenever there's an eventual reconstruction, rebuilding of Ukraine. All things that indicate a desire to be more greatly involved in the life of the region and beyond. And at a time when populism seems to be springing up in a lot of democracies, including our own, Japan, in a major way or in a large way, has not seen populism crop up. There's a bit here, a bit there. As a general matter, it is not. And I think that's an attractive thing for other nations who are experiencing at least the beginning of populism to learn from Japan, to see from Japan how they've been able to glide forward as a democracy without succumbing to the siren call of populism.
Thank you very much. Mike Mazza mentioned the other visit next week of President Marcos, and of course there'll be a trilateral meeting in between the two bilateral meetings with Kishida and Marcos respectively. You spent a lot of time in the Philippines as well, and were the key negotiator when we reached agreement to extend our forces deployed at Subic and Clark, although the Philippine Senate turned it down. Could you comment a bit on where you see the Philippines alliance right now, but particularly this trilateral piece of Japan's interest in the Philippines and the Philippines' willingness and interest in cooperating with Japan?
Yes, thank you, Randy. For me, there's a bit of irony in this whole reinvigoration of our alliance with the Philippines. First of all, I was one of those who was involved in getting former President Marcos out because he was bleeding the country dry. He wasn't paying attention to what was a very large and growing insurgency, etc. And now to have his son as the president, whom I've met, I've come to 180 degrees different view now of the Philippines. This Bongbong Marcos is a very serious guy, and he knows what he wants and he knows what he needs. He also knows how difficult the governance of what thousands and thousands of islands really entails. For Japan's part, Japan has been concerned with what's going on as the Chinese are bullying the Philippines, are being very gnarly in the Thomas Shoal, Scarborough Reef situation, putting water hoses onto Filipino citizens on the boats trying to resupply those areas. So all in all, it has led, I think, to a situation where, although Mr. Marcos wants to go as much by himself as possible, and that's commendable, he does, I think, want to show that there are other possibilities. And I think Japan also wants to just send a signal to China that you can't take anything for granted.
Yeah, thank you very much. You mentioned the signaling to China. It would occur to one who pulled out a map that lying in between Japan and the Philippines is Taiwan geographically. Do you expect that to be a topic of the Trilateral, even if it's behind the scenes and not highlighted a lot? Do you see these countries playing a key role in the deterrence equation related to Taiwan?
I do, and have to acknowledge the distance which Japan has traveled in terms of now recognition of Japan's equities in peace and stability in Taiwan, to the extent of even including it in various white papers. So I think it will be a part of the discussion, probably not the major part. It will, however, be a part and a major part of our discussion this afternoon at CSIS and how to bring Taiwan more closely into the fold, understanding Japan's security thinking, the U.S. security thinking regarding Taiwan, and what Japan and the United States may be able to do about it. The reason I say it may not be a major part, initially the major focus, I think, is going to be on the alliance and those things that are directly involved between the two of us, Mr. Kishida and Mr. Biden. That will take up, I think, the majority of the time. Just a point, I mentioned or Mike did, the address to Congress, which Mr. Kishida will make. This follows Mr. Abe's very successful address to Congress. And it's very high stakes for Prime Minister Kishida because unavoidably he'll be judged against the Abe speech. So it's very important that the Prime Minister hit a home run like Mr. Otani did yesterday.
Well, I appreciate that analogy very much. I think it is an important opportunity, and I look at it as an opportunity for our members of Congress to hear from somebody who's got a view about the region and Japan's own role, but also expectations for the alliance. President Biden just had a phone call with General Secretary Xi Jinping, their first contact since the meeting on the margins of APEC. China's obviously watching all these developments and seeing our allies come to Washington, be received with things like the joint session with Congress, before Congress. How do you think China is reading all these developments combined with some uncertainty in our upcoming election? Where do you think China is sizing things up right now?
First of all, I think that on the call that you mentioned, Randy, Xi Jinping certainly expected the mention of the three major items that President Biden brought up: overcapacity, fentanyl, and support for Russia by Chinese firms, and the fact that some sanctions are probably imminent on those firms who are supporting China. But my other observation on this is we don't credit enough, we, the United States, for that matter, Taiwan or Japan, with how underconfident China really is. And this is a new dimension. For the last 15, 20 years, it's been a very confident China. And now it's not. And so it's much harder to totally predict how China is going to react in one situation or another. But I think China probably viewed this discussion between Xi and Biden as a housekeeping matter. Keeps things warm. It probably set the stage for Secretary Yellen's visit. She's on her way now. And my understanding is Secretary Yellen is about the only person that China takes seriously these days. So, but I don't expect that call in itself has changed much. I don't expect China has yet a well-formed view of who they want to be president, because they know, for instance, if Mr. Trump is the president, sanctions are going to come for sure. They know with Mr. Biden, sanctions are going to come for sure, but there'll be more sort of thoughtful ones that protect our technology, particularly our precious technology, and won't be kind of helter-skelter, as I think they probably fear will be the case from a potential President Trump.
Thank you for that answer. It has been interesting to watch China engage our business community. They maybe Secretary Yellen is one of the only they take seriously in government. They've certainly been courting CEOs and people in our business community. You mentioned the possibility of more sanctions, no matter who wins the next election and what form they might take. How do you think, particularly Japan, views the possibility of more sanctions, more economic pressure, more discussions about coordinating export control moves in the technology sector? Are we shoulder to shoulder with Japan on this, or is there some daylight?
I think, first of all, Japan probably still has some questions about how we're going to apply sanctions, and certainly on what sectors and what's really meant by the phrase you hear from the Biden administration, high walls and small yards, is what will protect. That is, certain sectors of our economy. I can't imagine, once fully explained, that Japan will have a major problem with these issues. But if we don't fully explain them to Japan, including, as you mentioned, possibilities of some follow-on to the Vasana system, that there can be some questions that crop up. This has not been an issue that has been raised to me by Japan recently, however.
Thank you. We are about to shift to our panel discussion. Before we do that, I don't know if you had any concluding thoughts. I understand you're kind of to stay on for a potential Q&A later, but any concluding thoughts on the upcoming summit or beyond, or baseball?
Yes, actually, I do. Mr. Abe is probably looking down with a great deal of satisfaction at what he's seeing. There's problems with his faction or problems with the LDP, but in terms of the nation, what has happened has to be edifying to Mr. Abe, who, after all, was the initial father of a free and open, now secure and prosperous Indo-Pacific. So I think we need to very much acknowledge that. And it was his indefatigable diplomacy which set the scene for a whole new view of Japan in Southeast Asia. So what we're going to see this afternoon, or tomorrow, the next week, excuse me, with the Kishida Biden summit and the official visit and the state dinner is a culmination of Abe Sori's activities, of that I don't think there's any question. And lastly, those of us, your good self included, who have worked so hard for the U.S. Japan relationship, should not in any way be seen as cheerleaders for Japan. We're cheerleaders for the United States. And being cheerleaders for the United States means we have to value the precious relationship, the alliance we have with Japan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Armitage, and thank you for those very appropriate words about former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and certainly agree with all those sentiments. I'm going to shift to my colleague, Senior Director Jennifer Hong-Wetzel, and Jennifer is going to help lead the panel discussion portion of this webinar. Jen?
Yes, thank you. Ambassador Armitage, it's an honor to be on this panel with you. Thank you so much for your insightful thoughts. We know that as we are looking ahead to the Biden-Kishida visit, we hope that all the outcomes that come out of that will just continue to contribute to the strong foundation that U.S. Japan has in its work together, in its alliance. My name is Jennifer Hong. I'm the Senior Director at Project 2049, and I have the privilege of leading this portion of our conversation where we have two Japanese Japan experts, Yuko Makai and Yuka Kishida. Yuko, you guys actually joining from Japan, so thank you so much. Yuko, we'll start with you, who has been a political reporter for Yomiuri Shimbun, covering Japanese domestic politics, foreign policy, and U.S.-China-Taiwan relations. And I have to note that she is also a non-resident fellow at Project 2049. And Yuka has been with the International Institute for Strategic Studies since 2020, focusing on Japanese security, defense, and technology policies, and the role of U.S. alliances in the Indo-Pacific. So Yuko, I will go to you. Maybe you can touch upon, comment on the conversation that we just had, maybe add a little bit of a Japanese domestic politics angle to it. And then Yuka, I will turn it over to you directly after that with more of a security defense angles. So to you, Yuko.
Hi, Jen, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to serve as a panelist here today. Before I start my remarks, I just would like to make it clear that the view is my own, but not one of the Yomiuri Shimbun. So I just cannot agree more what Ambassador Armitage mentioned about Prime Minister Abe, what he has achieved in terms of enhancing Japanese existence in the international society and enhancing U.S.-Japan alliance. So on the top of that, today I would like to highlight mainly 3 points. First, I would like to explain how the official visit means to Prime Minister Kishida, along with the political background of Japan. Official visit is almost the same meaning of the state visit, which Kishida will welcome with the utmost prestige as a state guest. This will be the first official visit in 9 years since Shinzo Abe. Being invited as an official guest to the United States, Japan's only ally, means a great political legacy for the Japanese political leader. Kishida is also scheduled to give an address to the U.S. Congress, which will be another major showcase. At Abe's visit in 2015, the U.S. President was Barack Obama. It is said that those two leaders did not have a good chemistry, but President Obama nevertheless showed his warm regards by greeting Abe and speaking a series of Japanese words, including like manga, karaoke, or karate. A bit stereotypical words, but the Japanese people like these kind of efforts by the US president. I'm sure President Biden would also offer a variety of hospitality. Such a warm atmosphere between the two leaders will further strengthen the U.S.-Japan alliance. Domestically, Prime Minister Kishida is facing an extremely challenging political situation. The ruling Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, of which Kishida is a party leader, has been in the midst of the money scandal for several months. Both the Kishida administration and LDP has seen their approval rating drop to the historically low point to around 20%. Kishida needs to win the LDP chairman election in September to stay as a prime minister under this cabinet system. But to be frank, I think it's very hard for him to stay in his position. However, the prime minister and his aides are very hopeful that he will use this diplomatic spectacle of this visit to attract a Japanese audience and regain the support. Secondly, the outcome of this visit will be demonstrate Japan's determination play a more proactive role in the regional security, especially in the Indo-Pacific. As discussed in the earlier conversation, prominent example of restructure the U.S. Military command in Japan. Japan is in fact willing to take more active role as a partner of U.S. in the regional security, not just its own. Post-war Japan has been cautious about taking any kinds of expansion of security cooperation due to the constructural restriction on the self-defense force. Then what changed Japan's mind? It is, of course, China. As the map shows, Japan is one of the most geopolitically challenging locations surrounded by China, Russia, and North Korea. Japan is being subjected to China's gray zone tactics in the Senkaku Island, and it's responding to the attempt to change the status quo on the daily basis. Besides that, the closest proximity between Japan and Taiwan is only about 70 miles. It's from here to Shenandoah. It's very close. Once a contingency occurs in the Taiwan Strait, Japan will have no choice. Will be part of it. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was also a serious wake-up call for Tokyo. In 2022, the Kishida cabinet decided on three important security documents, such as the National Security Strategy, which is called NSS. NSS stated that China the greatest strategic challenge in ensuring the peace and the security of Japan. In fact, Japanese people are becoming increasingly wary of China. In the poll conducted jointly by the Yomiuri Shimbun and Gallup in 2022, 80% of Japanese said China is a military threat. That the number is higher. The U.S. Responded 75. 61% of Japanese believe that China will one day to invade Taiwan militarily. The number is also higher, the 56% of Americans. This harsh public perception of China has also helped the Japanese government to advance its security policy. Kishida's plan to raise defense spending up to 2% of GDP by fiscal year 2027 was understood by the public. Given the increasingly severe security environment, Japan's security policy has made many times more progress in the past several years than in decades past. Finally, I would like to add some thoughts about the significance of this historical Trilateral Summit meeting between U.S., Japan, and the Philippines. Given the circumstances of the second Thomas Shoal in the South China Sea, Japan will finalize the RAA, Reciprocal Access Agreement with the Philippines, perhaps finalizing later this year. Once it's concluded, the RAA will allow Japan's self-defense force be temporarily stationed in the Philippines and deepen the two countries' security cooperation, such as exercise or training. Japan already has RAA with Australia or United Kingdom, and we consider them as a quasi-allies. Why is this happening now? Why is Japan doing this now? The South China Sea, the East China Sea, where the Senkaku Islands are, also Taiwan Strait, they are not separated issues. They are the clear targets of Chinese ambitions. If contingency happens in one place, it could lead to another. We need to prepare to respond. As Ambassador Armitage mentioned earlier, I believe that Taiwan is a really hidden keyword in this trilateral. I used to live in Taipei and flew to Manila regularly. It's only 2 hours flight. It's very close. Of course, no need to say strengthening deterrence to prevent the contingency is even more important. Regardless, Japan is now ready to take more responsibility in the regional security as one of the global leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuko. Yuka, turning it over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me in this conversation. I think it reminds me that I was actually an intern at the CSIS when the fourth Armitage NI report was rolled out in 2018. So it's my great honor to share the panel with you, Ambassador Armitage, and very nice to share the panel with you, Yuka-san, as well. So I think the first official visit, as Yuko-san has explained, in 2015. Since then, the global strategic environment has dramatically changed, including growing strategic links between Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific, driven by the U.S.-China great power competition and Russia's invasion by Ukraine. Invasion in Ukraine, and also Japan's role has expanded globally, like Ambassador Armitage has explained, and it's now championing the free and open Indo-Pacific region, or the free and open international order, more widely and globally as well. So I would say that in terms of the summit, it's not just for the U.S. and Japan and their domestic audiences and the regional partners, but global. This summit is on attracting global attention from countries, including Europe. So it will be really interesting to see what the outcomes will be. So I think in my opening brief remarks, I would like to touch on several key areas that I think would be important from Japan's perspective in defense and also the economic dimensions. So on defense, the two countries have already demonstrated greater alignment to enhance deterrence and response capabilities through their national security strategies and defense strategy documents released in 2022, including Japan's possession of counterstrike capabilities and U.S. support towards it that the two speakers have already mentioned. So now that Japan, in Japan's context, it is entering year 2 of its project to fundamentally reinforce its defense capabilities by fiscal year 2027 to basically enhance war-fighting capabilities and capacities. So this summit is a really important opportunity to showcase that the two countries are further stepping up its cooperation to send strong signals to China that the alliance is ever stronger and that their deterrence is credible. So several areas are particularly important to add depth to the U.S.-Japan defense and security cooperation. One is, as Ambassador Armitage has already outlined and highlighted, is the operational dimension to remove the remaining practical obstacles for greater operational coordination, including the upgrading of the command and control architecture. And then the second dimension is the defense industrial collaborations. So one of the key lessons learned from the war in Ukraine is that having a resilient regional defense industrial supply chain among allies and partners from peacetime is critical to prepare for a potential future contingency, including the stockpiling of ammunitions. For instance, we've already seen debates over the past year that Japanese private shipyards should be able to conduct MROs, like maintenance, repair, and overhaul of U.S. Navy ships in Japanese private shipyards. And there has been reporting that we might be able to see some kind of formalization in this arrangement in the summit. Moreover, last year, Japan also did its part to revise its defense equipment and technology transfer guidelines in December to allow exports of defense equipment produced in Japan under license from foreign arms makers, which further creates opportunities for cooperation on ammunition stockpiling so that, for instance, U.S. could engage in multiple theaters at the same time. We've already seen that Tokyo will supply PAC-2 and PAC-3 interceptors to the U.S., but the summit could also discuss new mechanism to do more in this context. It is important that to highlight that this effort is also a win-win for both countries. And Japan could also benefit from cooperation with the US on defense industries. So increasing demand from the US would also mitigate Japanese industry's concern over uncertainties of Japanese investments after 2027, therefore contributing to Tokyo's efforts and goals to reinvigorate Japan's defense industrial base, which it defined as the defense capability itself in the national security strategy. The third is the defense technology dimension. So since the AUKUS initiative was announced in 2021, we have seen debates about Japan's potential role in any of the working groups under the Pillar 2 activities on advanced defense technologies. For instance, in areas of AI, advanced robotics, uncrewed aerial vehicles and naval vehicles, and cyber and space and hypersonics. So indeed, Japan's R&D guidelines and roadmaps that we have seen since around 2018 has significant overlaps with AUKUS's focus out areas like the areas that I have mentioned. But US security concerns over Japanese, for instance, cybersecurity standards or information security in general have been a major obstacle for advanced defense R&D cooperation. So against this backdrop, Japan is also doing its homework and have, for instance, stepped up by adopting legislations that requires Japanese defense contractors and their subsidiaries to adopt the US NIST guidelines for cybersecurity, and also it has crafted bills to introduce security clearance systems for individuals from industries, including industries who are handling government information. So US senior officials have been discussing the possibility to open up projects to partners, as well as possibility for Japan to become one of the first of these countries. But Japan's involvement, most importantly, would mean that there is a higher level of trust in the US system towards Japan's system than ever, and that there will be greater interoperability among defense innovation ecosystems among US and US partners. Moreover, greater potential for future interchangeability achieved among US allies and like-minded partners, which could send even more stronger signals to China that their deterrence, response, and operational capabilities are credible. So finally, just very briefly on the economic front, the summit is also expected to give Tokyo and Japanese industries some reassurances that Washington is interested in seeking greater coordination with Japan on economic security and industrial policies that I think Ambassador Armitage also touched on. Of course, as we've seen in previous summits, Japan and US are aligned on de-risking from China and have coordinated on series of measures on economic securities, such as October 7th export control on advanced AI chips and semiconductor manufacturing equipment. But of course, US kind of unilateral decision-making on economic security measures and industrial policies targeted against China often came without coordination and surprised Japanese policymakers and industries, often causing some kind of cost and harms. And this also includes the industrial policies, including the RAA in 2022, which are tax credits for electric vehicles that have at least half of their battery components made or assembled in North America. So there are growing concerns that US could be leaning towards protectionism, and that this trend of reshoring rather than friendshoring can continue, driven by domestic political environment. So it appears from at least the reporting that the summit will agree on, for instance, subsidy rules for strategic goods such as semiconductor storage batteries and permanent magnets, as well as setting shared standards and criteria for subsidies and tax breaks to set shared standards on subsidy policies, and potentially also include Europe in this framework as well. So it is really important that to signal that the US also wants to explore ways to enhance supply chain resiliency and economic security under the WTO rules, and also that the Washington is also seeking a win-win solution that will bring benefit not just for the US, but also for Japanese and partners and like-minded partners beyond Japan as well. So I think I'll stop there, and I really look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuko and Yuka. We have many questions coming in right now with less than, I guess, about 11 minutes to the end of the webinar. So we will jump right into the questions. Thank you all for being willing to participate in the Q&A session. So this question is from Shogo Kawakita from Kyoto News. As you know, Japan is establishing a new joint operations command. However, as of yet, there is no joint operational commander in Japan on the American side. Given the distance between Hawaii and Japan, might the United States consider establishing a counterpart of similar status and authority? Are there any obstacles to doing so, and would such a move produce any overlaps in authority with Indo-Pacific?
Is that directed to me?
Anyone can answer. If you'd like to start, sir.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Right, the Joint Operational Command in Japan next year, or by next year, I think is a direct outgrowth of what we saw at the disaster at Fukushima. When coordination between the various self-defense forces was very difficult and wasn't as sort of smooth and seamless as it ought to be. The second is, both our speakers have alluded, thank you, China. China has made this a necessity. Regarding the United States, as I said in my remarks, the command has been confusing and not solely focused on the alliance. I expect coming out of this summit that there'll be either an indication of the desire of the United States to rectify that situation, if not a direct announcement of the rectification. It will mean a larger and joint staff from the United States in Japan, for sure. And I fully expect that to happen. The constraints actually would seem silly. All the services in the United States are very jealous of who holds what position. It also would be a function of the decision of the United States at what level, 3 or 4 star, to have this new commander who will occupy that job hold. And that's a matter of jockeying among and between our services, because we're actually limited to the number of 4 stars. So those are some of the things that would inhibit it, but I don't think inhibit it to such a degree that it won't happen.
Okay. For the next question, I'm going to combine it. Russell Shao from Global Taiwan Institute and Ian Easton from U.S. Naval War College. With rising tensions across the Taiwan Strait, the United States and like-minded allies, particularly Japan, have been deepening defense cooperation to strengthen deterrence. How well prepared is the U.S. Japan Alliance for a potential PRC attack on Taiwan? What might alliance do better to deter Xi Jinping from continuing to coerce Taiwan and elevate cross-strait tensions? Some U.S. scholars are now calling the United States to issue credible assurances to Beijing to avoid a war. Do you agree with this kind of offering? Do you agree with this view that offering credible assurances is necessary right now? And how might key U.S. allies like Japan view such a move?
This is going to sound like a weasel worded answer. But the fact is that an activity by the United States regarding military support, direct support for Taiwan, would first of all be a function of how a Chinese military attack took place. What's the backdrop? For instance, if Taiwan were to declare independence, all of a sudden, not just de facto, but de jure independence, that would affect the response of the United States. If, on the other hand, Japan were to be attacked, Taiwan were to be attacked out of the blue without any statements, decisions, or actions Taiwan's part, then the response of the United States would be quite different. Japan, as I understand it right now, is willing to discuss what would be necessary in a Taiwan scenario. In fact, has discussed it. It's more, though, how Japan could offer what we would call rear area support. and with the recognition that an attack out of the blue would probably have a pretty tough response from the United States.
Go ahead, Randy, and then I'll go to you, Yuka.
Yeah, just very briefly to add on to that excellent answer. I think on the military side, there's been agreement to move forward with bilateral planning, which is done, quietly behind the scenes. But, as President Eisenhower used to say, plans are useless, but planning is essential. So getting the two sides to talk about a contingency and the range of responses is very important. I think also demonstrating some capabilities in the Southwest Island chain using more Japanese territory for some of the exercising is also a strong signal that could have deterrent impact. But I would just say that the real missing piece, I think, is on economic cost imposition. We know what the Chinese are saying about Russia and the cost imposition. Yes, it was quick. Yes, it was very impressive in terms of international support. Yes, it's had an impact on Russia, but our economy's larger, we're more diverse, we're more integrated in the global supply chain. So I think we need to build out a little more what a cost imposition strategy could look like and display that in ways that are credible to have maximum deterrent impact.
Just very quickly, I think I would say that the Japan and also the U.S. Japan cooperation is taking the right steps. But it's just that I think the current strategies that Japan released is it really emphasized that Japan will defend by itself. That's a really step change in the U.S. Japan Alliance context as well. But that also helps a U.S. Frees up its focus on Taiwan whenever a contingency. So in that sense, there's a discussions on and divisions of roles. But I think what's missing potentially is Japan's interactions and engagement with Taiwan. There's no official formal channels for discussions right now, unlike the U.S. So I think that's one missing piece that we've also heard some debates of potential need for that. And I think on the assurance piece, I think there has been Japan. There has been discussions in Japan that military only option in terms of deterrence is not going to could be dangerous, and in terms of dealing with China, you need to also include economic options and diplomatic options. So I think it's more about how do we create a comprehensive architecture in terms of dealing with China, and we do hear these debates in Japan.
I just want to add what's the relationship Taiwan and Japan is. It's unlike United States and Taiwan. Taiwan-Japan relationship is not very defined by any law. We don't have TRA. We have very ambiguous Taiwan policy, but it's not strategic ambiguity. It's non-strategic ambiguity. So based on that situation, I know both sides have a will to talk. But for Japan, it's because we have to also maintain a good relationship with mainland China that it makes the political talk very, very difficult. It's very challenging. But there is another way that framework to create a framework. For example, like Coast Guard training is a very good option, which I believe that there is a try to do so, and human rights framework. So there is a talk, not necessarily a political framework, but I think there is definitely a room and a basement that Taiwan and Japan can go further. Thank you.
We're leading closer to 11 o'clock now. And so all those who asked many questions, sorry that we could not get to all of them. Ambassador Armitage, thank you once again for being with us. Randy, Yuka, thank you for being with us. For those of you who would love to share this webinar with others, please, there'll be a recorded version of this on YouTube. So please find it and also share widely with others. Thank you. And thank you all for being here with us.
Thank you.
Okay, I close.